Buenos dias. Good morning to our Australian and New Zealand friends. They'll be reassured to know that it's almost time for beer. Does wonders for your jet lag. Now, the first thing I'm going to ask is, there are a lot of you spread out quite far. And if you wanted to sit alone and watch me speak, there's this wonderful tool called YouTube that would allow you to sit alone and listen to me speak. So if you're sat alone or in a pair at the back of the room, if you're sat in one of these things, just come forward to the front, make a new friend. Come on, do it. You lift up those legs, arriba, arriba, walk down a little bit. Sit next to someone new, someone you don't know. Sit next to someone good looking. Sit down next to someone of a different language, a different nationality. This is wonderful. And you make my job easier as well. Superb. And for those of you wondering, this is where Notosh is based in Edinburgh. This is the harbour where Notosh Limited in Edinburgh is based. And we've been 5 years old this year, working on some adventurous, brave projects with some adventurous, brave schools. And about 30% of our work is not just with schools. It's also with engineering companies, television firms, fashion companies, you name it. The reason that I've always wanted our team to work not just in schools, but to work in those creative industries, is that when we hear these talks and people say, our children are learning for jobs that we don't even know will exist. And you say, well, actually, we do know what jobs will exist because we're working with the very firms who are in the middle of creating them. And the processes that they use to learn are really interesting for education. And in fact, they learn as much from thinking research and education as anything else. So I wanted to end your Wednesday on a positive note. This is the failure talk. And failure is one of these things that is often talked about in admirable terms. But we don't really get beyond scratching the surface. And the reason I've started with this slide is that when I did the opening keynote of ICOT 2013 in Wellington, New Zealand, this was the only slide that everybody photographed with their iPad. And I thought, okay, so that's a crowdsourced recognition that something interesting is happening in failure. But that talk wasn't about failure. It was about something totally different. So I thought I would just continue the ICOT journey by picking up the conversation where we left it 2 years ago. What about failure? Well, failure is an inherent part of making great stuff happen. If you're doing stuff that matters, that really matters, you are going to fail. And very often in the big projects that we do, if we don't fail, we get accused of not having really tried hard enough. And I wanted to unpack a little bit what we mean by that. What matters? What kinds of things do we do that we feel matter? A few examples. We helped the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne with one of the most wicked problems I think I've ever heard of in education. How would you get on if you had 2,500 students a year to teach with a team of 12 teachers? That was the challenge they faced. And not just that, but when they were teaching, they were second importance to the first job of the hospital, which was to make kids get better. And so imagine being in the middle of a lesson. I'm sure some of you teachers have had this. You're in the middle of the lesson, and the head teacher comes in, and all of a sudden the kids have stopped learning because the head teacher's coming and the flow's broken, and you're cursing the head teachers. Oh, why do they have to come now? We were just getting into it. Well, that happens with doctors coming in saying, sorry, I've got to treat this child, or a physiotherapist coming in, changing. So we revolutionized the way they do it. So now learning in that hospital is fantastic. We worked with a high fashion, luxury fashion company with their foundation in the cities in which they operate in London, New York, Chicago, Shanghai, Hong Kong. to take young unemployed young people who had been unemployed for 9 months, 12 months or more, and in 6 weeks, using design thinking and pedagogical thinking skills, we were able to get over 90% of them into full-time employment outside that company, something that's of huge interest in countries like Spain, like Italy, like Scotland. We've done other things as well that have nothing really to do with education. In 2011, we were asked to help run the digital part of the election campaign for the Scottish National Party. And when we were hired, they were 15 points behind the competition, the Labour Party. In 100 days, we helped take them 18 points ahead. In this photograph, you have Nicola Sturgeon, our now First Minister, who has gone on to leave the Labour Party absolutely obliterated. The party who were number one only 4 years ago now barely exist in Scotland. I like this photo as well because actually here, that's my mum in the photo. How's that? Mum bombing. That's a sort of photo bombing of one's mum. We've also helped in all kinds of schools, of course. About at least half of our work is with schools. We work with a lot of elite schools. The one on the left is a school in Singapore of 4,000 students. Imagine that. That's a big school assembly, isn't it? And the challenge in that school is that academically they're up here. The challenge was, how can we help these students not just learn about science, but to think like scientists? How can we help them not just to learn about history, but to become historians? The schools on the right are 3 schools, or students from 3 schools in Brixton, South London, where 3 of their peers had been stabbed to death within 18 months of each other. And we were asked to work with these students to see if we might not be able to help them find the underlying problem. Because so many people had tried, so many big people, big and hairy people had tried before and had failed. Maybe the young people could find the genuine problem and go about solving it, and they absolutely did. So a lot of our work revolves around what you might call real-world learning, and we do it with a tiny team. 6 people from 3 offices working over 6 continents, with nearly 700 schools, over 30,000 teachers now, and working directly with about 66,000 students in 5 years. The interesting number is the one at the top. We've worked with nearly 2,000 chief executive officers, senior leaders, and startup entrepreneurs. And we started out thinking that we would learn plenty from them that we could use in schools. I would say it's actually the opposite. I think that the entrepreneurs and the chief executives of multinationals are learning more about quality feedback from 5-year-olds than the other way around. And so that mix of work means that we feel we're doing stuff that matters. It also means that we fail quite a lot. So 2 weeks ago, I was working in Denmark with these incredibly stylish Danish children. You go to Denmark, you feel underdressed the whole time. And this kid had this t-shirt, "Be fearful of mediocrity." And I thought, how Danish? Are there any Danish people in the audience? Yes? No? No? Good. So, the Danish are lovely people. They're the happiest people in the world. And they have this thing called hygge. And hygge basically means don't rock the boat. It means that you're content with life. Life is good. Things are good. And they make it into a verb. You know, it sounds like hyggeste. Hygge. Can you all say hygge? There you go. So tonight, when you're drinking your beer and having your pinchos, you can say hygge. But that is the problem with hygge, that you're fearful of mediocrity, because mediocrity is not hygge, it's sub-hygge. So if you're fearful of mediocrity, you're not aiming for something high, you're actually avoiding something low. And so it becomes really hard for these students to produce any idea that's not perfect. And we were trying to get them to think like prototypers, to think like designers, where you prototype and test, get feedback, and make your idea better. That's incredibly hard to do if you are fearful of making a mistake. So what does making a mistake actually feel like? Take a look at this. Maria João Pires, amazing pianist. But something's gone wrong. This is how I looked at 8 o'clock this morning, thinking about speaking to you. What's going on? The conductor knows something is wrong. You can see it in the eyes. She's practiced the wrong piece. And he's going, it's going to be good. It's going to be fine.
She was shocked because she was expecting us to play another concerto. So when I started the first bar of the D minor concerto, she kind of jumped and panicked, like an electric shock, I think. And she couldn't consider even moving ahead playing, you know. And then we talked a moment, and she told me I was expecting to play a completely different piece. I do what I can do if I remember. And the miracle is that she has such a memory that she could, within a minute, switch to a new concerto without making one mistake.
And so what you see here is a change in leadership. So he's been leading. He's been saying, it's going to be great. And then she gathers herself. She brings that piece that she hasn't practiced. And she plays it perfectly. And what you've got going on here is really interesting, because she looked failure in the face, but there was no option to turn back. Why not? Because, if you like, the teacher at that point was the conductor and the rest of the orchestra that was saying, we're not going back. We've just started. The train has left the platform. And what does he do? He doesn't say, oh, how could you? I thought you were virtuoso. How could you not read the piece that we're practicing this season? She had practiced the concerto from last season. And instead of saying that, he says, you're going to do wonderfully well. You're going to be great. And off they go. There then becomes an obligation to deliver, to actually make something happen. And so that's often the first challenge, that the fear of failure that we have stops us making it happen. Now here's another musical metaphor, and it's from jazz. Do you like jazz? Yeah? So let's see how musical ICOT 2015 is, okay? I want you to put your hand up if you hear a wrong note. And jazz does have wrong notes. Here we go. Thank goodness some of you put your hand up. Let's try this again. Yes, that is not jazz. That is a mistake. It is a failure. Now I'm going to play you the same F sharp that he played there. You're going to hear the same note. So in theory, it's the same mistake. Let's see if it feels like it's a mistake to you. Put your hand up if you feel there's a mistake. There was a lot of this. It's not quite a mistake, is it? So what you've got there, it's the same note, and lots of you rightly did this. As if it was kind of like, you know, a salute, an army salute from someone who's never been in the army, like this, you know. Stefan Harris and his orchestra, their band, the second time round, they were doing something that they were not doing the first time. So when his pianist plays the F sharp the first time, everybody's got the plan, and they just concentrate on the plan. And by concentrating on the plan, they make the F sharp become a mistake. The second time round, there is a plan. Musicians have a score of music. They know what they want to try and achieve. But this time, instead of it being a mistake, they're listening. And they say, well, if he's playing that, maybe I can take it up a bit. And they play around. And then Stefan, here on the glockenspiel, brings it back down again. He says, no, I don't like the F sharp. I'm going to bring it down, back down to home. And so on and so forth. And so the key, really, to making the most of failure is listening to your band. Now, what does listening to your band actually mean? What does it mean if you're a teacher? What does it mean if you're a student? Well, the two are quite different. So the thing about jazz is it builds on your strengths. So if you are, I'm a drummer, and we could probably have an amazing band here, actually, given the talent in the room. So I'm a drummer, and when you're playing drums, you have to listen. You look at your music, but you have to listen, especially in jazz. And you have to adapt what you're doing. In a classroom, the equivalent is doing something that you think is good. And then when someone gives you feedback and says it could be better, you then act on it and you change what you're doing to see whether it's better. But there's something else. I am a drummer. I'm not a trumpet player. So if someone says, Ewan, I really like your drums, but try this, and hands me a trumpet, I'm lost. I can't do anything with it. We build, in other words, we build on our strengths. And there's some great research that we've been putting to work over the past year about teachers concentrating not on what they don't know, but concentrating on what they do know, and then building on their strengths. And if you're the leader of a school, having your 20 staff, your 100 staff, or in the case of Singapore American School, having your 760 staff, understanding what their talents are, means that you don't waste time and money trying to get people up in certain skills that they are not naturally going to get that quickly. Instead, you build internal expertise that allows you to move the whole school forward in concert like an orchestra. You don't have an orchestra of everybody playing the trumpet. You have an orchestra where everyone knows the instrument they're playing and has their part clearly there to play. A bit like what Lane described. You know your learning job, so you know your part. You know what role you're playing in the recipe. Back at 2013, I talked about my time at Channel 4 Television as an investor, or what they call a commissioner. And I received a lot of emails from people who thought they had found the great new problem. You know, this is a great problem we've found, we're going to solve it. And the fact was they hadn't found a great problem to solve. It wasn't a problem that normal people had in their lives. And so a very, very small number of those ideas were ever successful. And that notion of problem finding extends to the classroom. Students, in general, even in project-based learning classes, often don't actually find genuine, compelling problems to solve. Here are some of the pseudo-problems that I showed 2 years ago. One's like this. Frank ate 12 pieces of pizza and Dave ate 15 pieces. I ate a quarter more, said Dave. I ate a fifth less, said Frank. Who was right? Who cares? Who gives a damn? It's one of these non-questions, stupid questions, pseudo-context. ¿Está estúpido? Is that correct? No. Okay. My Spanish is not there. This one was just slightly worrying. A child loves to watch as you fill a transparent plastic bottle with shampoo. This is a child with severe psychological disorders. And the problem with pseudo-contexts is if you're me in the math class, I'm looking at that wondering, why is he looking at the plastic bottle instead of thinking about the context? One of my favorites is this. You know, when people go, did you ever have teachers at school or university and they would just come out with quotes? So, knowledge is power, Francis Bacon. you know. And there was a beautiful blog post written by a teacher, Knowledge is Power, Francis Bacon. He said, I understood it as knowledge is power, France is bacon. And this is what he said. He said, for more than a decade, I wondered over the meaning of the second part. And what was the surreal linkage between the two? If I said the quote to someone, knowledge is power, France is bacon, they nodded knowingly. Or someone might say, knowledge is power, and I'd finish the quote, France is bacon. And they wouldn't look at me as if I'd said something odd. They would look at me and agree. I did ask a teacher, what did knowledge is power, France is bacon mean? And I got a full 10-minute explanation of the knowledge is power bit, but nothing on France being bacon. When I prompted further explanation by saying, France is bacon, in a questioning tone, I just got a, yeah. At 12 years old, I didn't have the confidence to press it further. I just accepted it as something I'd never understand. Now, let's be honest, people. How many of you have been in a seminar at ICOT 2015, heard something and gone, no, not a clue. I think the laughter confirms it. I'm glad I'm not alone. You sit there, and you'll do it tonight over cocktails at the Guggenheim, and you'll be looking at art in the Guggenheim going, not having a clue. So, now that we've got that out the way, you can all just come and have a drink with me, and we can look at it and go, no, I didn't get it either. The problem with problem finding with students, it really does start with that so what, who cares provocation. There's beautiful synergy really with a themed afternoon almost. The kinds of provocations that we've seen teachers create and we've seen students create, they're things like this. When does music become noise? How does an iPad know where it is? Radically rethinking how we move. The first 5 days of school, which we did with Collegi Montserrat, in fact. The earth is full. Evacuate! Every speck of dust tells a story. That's for 7-year-olds learning about rocks and soils, the world's most boring international baccalaureate unit. Made interesting. It's okay to stretch the truth to mobilize people to action. If you live in the United Kingdom, we know that's true. If you live in Scotland, it's a much more philosophical question, isn't it? Really deep. And you can discuss that, and you can dive into that with any age group. These provocations are what set children off in the kind of journey that Lane discussed this afternoon. But problem finding for teachers, I'm really passionate about teacher learning. I think that we dedicate a huge amount of our time to trying to work out how students learn best and changing our own practice. I spend most of my time in my team trying to work out how you learn better. And not just how you learn better for yourself, but how do you change and mobilize and bring people into your tribe and make them join you on a learning adventure. One of my biggest challenges is professional development. I'm going to make myself really unpopular with the organizers. I don't like conferences. And do you know why? Because I don't know if you do anything on the back of the 59 minutes we've got together. I haven't got a clue. I might meet you years later and you say, remember when you said we went off and did this? But it's not much use to me years later, is it? Likewise, the conversation is one that will often stay with your friends, with the people that you came with. Google have this thing called Google Teacher Academy. It's a conference. I hate it as well. I hated it. Because it was this thing where you used to turn up for 2 days and you would have all these people talking to you about the latest tool. And they were mostly North American. So here's a great tool to use. Now in Scotland, a tool is an insult to someone. You know, I think it is in New Zealand, perhaps Australia too. So you don't go around saying, hey, have you seen my new tool? No. It's not de rigueur to do that. So we said, instead of teaching people about Google, why don't we help people think like Googlers? So we created something crazy. We redid the Google Teacher Academy 3 times. We did it in Sydney, London, and Amsterdam. And in a moment of folly, I said, the Amsterdam one, we'll do it in Dutch. I don't speak any Dutch, but we still did it in Dutch. It was fabulous. Now, what did we do? Instead of telling people about stuff, we started 3 weeks before. We sent the teachers out with a very simple provocation to say, go and find everything that doesn't work, and go and find everything that does work. That was it. So for 3 weeks, they sketched what they saw. They began to discover problems. They quoted students. They wrote it down. They came together physically for 2 days after these 3 weeks. And so they brought all their data, post-it notes, printouts, sketches. They spilled everything onto the table, everything up onto the wall. They had these great big discussions, these amazing debates. And you know what? This is half an hour before the 2 days even begin. This amazing activity meant that the director of Google for Education entered the room, and she said, hold on, am I late? I thought it was starting today. I said, no, it's starting in half an hour from now, but they're on it. Because when teachers go seeking problems in their own school and seeking opportunities, interesting ideas, what's really heartening for them is to discover that teachers from all over the world, from totally different contexts, have discovered many of the same things. In fact, nearly every problem that they found is what I would call a wicked problem, a perennial problem. How did they find it? They took the research, and then we did some synthesis with them. I'll give you an example of what synthesis means. Here I'm actually working with some other teachers. I wanted to show you when you take those post-it notes and all that data and write one key point per little hexagon. We use hexagons because they tessellate well. They have 6 sides. They connect better than something with 4 sides. So when something connects more than 4 sides, you can get some quite complex thinking. Many people will think, they'll see this and go, oh, that's what they use in the Solo taxonomy. And you'd be right. But it actually started in the oil industry in the North Sea in the 80s. A Dutchman called Arie de Geus was struggling to get his engineers to think about complex challenges to do with the sustainability of North Sea oil. Put simply, there's not going to be any oil in 35 years, perhaps. Maybe we should think about doing other things too. But engineers couldn't think about that. All they could think about was drilling oil. And when you drill for oil, you drill in the form of a hexagon. And it means you never miss a drop. So we used the same metaphor, if you like, to get them thinking more complexly about what we were doing. What you end up with are concepts like this, linchpin concepts, where the 2 ideas you've noted here depend on survival, but with that linchpin concept to connect to the rest of the work you're doing. Or you might find that you've got 3 really core ideas, but there's no glue joining them together. One idea there, there's another one there, there's another one here. So what's the point of focus? And is there something we could do there that makes that greater than the sum of its parts? People find outliers. The question about outlying ideas is, are they interesting, or are they totally irrelevant and we should kill them because they're not worth doing anymore? Schools are terrible at killing ideas. Doing this gives you confidence that you are killing the good idea. You can also test to see if they are interesting, are you missing something? Is there an amazing gap that you could fill? Is there an innovative idea that you could put in there? And feeding this is the research about teaching and learning. Filling these gaps are critical and creative thinking skills. But synthesizing your problem that lies right underneath your nose and combining it with this way of thinking means that people at the Google Teacher Academy discovered challenges that they had never known anything about. Now, we set them off after that for 6 months. And they graduated. It's a lovely family photo. But when they graduate from these 2 days, it's not over. For 6 months, we mentored them as they went through. trying to put their ideas into action. When they left the room, they were high as kites. I can change anything, they said, which was great for us. And we could just have said, hey, we've done a good job, pat on the back, let's go. The challenge is that when you come up with an idea, that's easy. Actually, the hard part. I'm talking in more detail about how you actually make them happen tomorrow. What I wanted to explore was something much more everyday for teachers who are maybe not inventing new ideas, but who are hearing things at conferences like this, things you've heard today, which you could do in your classroom. But deep inside, you really want the teacher in the classroom next door to you to do it. Or they chose not to show up. Or they went to some other session, and so they're enthusiastic about that instead of what you're enthusiastic about. In 5 years of trying, we've discovered that, it's not just in Google Teacher Academies. Schools do come, and often the provocation comes from something outside. One of my favorite jobs has been with the American School in Japan, a project that came out of the disaster that ensued after the earthquake. Ed Ladd, the director of the school, stood on his sports pitches during this earthquake, watching with his students in front of him, watching the playing fields run up towards them. And in the following weeks, they lost scores of students as their families said, this is a dangerous place, we're not living here anymore. We're going to go to Hong Kong, we're going to go to Australia, we're going to go anywhere else but here. And so they realized that this provocation needed a response. They needed to do something differently. My big thing was, what's the itch you're trying to scratch? Is this something compelling? Is there genuinely a question that you're trying to answer? Or is this just marketing? Or you just wanted to do something different on the surface? And the answer was something quite profound. The problem for that school and many other schools is they work to plans normally. So the annual plan always revolves around. You know that we spend, we're helping to redesign a school campus in Shanghai, and the architect is obsessed how you can, not obsessed, it's normal for architects to ask the question, how do we take your learning environment and also make it work for examinations? And I couldn't believe the amount of time we were wasting. So I did an analysis, and this is a school which does a lot of testing. 0.3% of the time of the year is spent. So why devote your annual plan to 0.3% of the effort? 5-year plans are not much better. Hellenistic 5-year plan. If you try and look through a crystal ball as to what's going to happen in 5 years' time, everything is upside down. So with the American school in Japan, in 2011, this is what they said they wanted to try and achieve. They wanted to offer more than just great grades. They also wanted to offer a way of students to think about their thinking. They wanted to offer world-class design thinking to their students. And the minute that was declared in their strategy, something happened. And it's a chain of events, a chain reaction of events that every one of you will have when you take any idea back to your classroom and you try to get one other person to do it. And it's these 3 things. You're going to meet with contradictions, tensions, and surprises. You want the surprises. But after 5 years of trying, I don't think you get the surprises unless you have the contradictions, work through the tensions, and then you get the beautiful surprise. So let's start by looking at the contradictions. I love this. We love Italy, go there every year. I never did find Piazzale Roma. And the other one is tutte le direzioni. Do you have this in Spain, actually? You have in France as well, toute direction, so all directions, and then underneath it, and pointing a different way, autre direction. So all directions, other directions. And you're going round the roundabout 6 times, having an existential debate about whether you're going to other places or all places. Thank you. So, contradictions. Number 1 contradiction, and I've heard it already today, actually. None of this is intended to be critical of my peers, because I see these things too. But when anyone tells me the research says, my mind blue screens, like a Microsoft computer that's got too hot. Someone says, the research says, I just go, oh, and shut down. Because if you're a classroom teacher, the research doesn't tell you how to deal with Jaime, always called Jaime, aren't they? It's always James. In Scotland, it's James or Kelly Ann. So we've got Jaime. What's the girl called in a Spanish school? Huh? Oh, no, the girl? Maria. So, okay, so we have Kelly Ann in Scotland, Maria in Spain, Jaime and James. So the thing that doesn't deal with that. There's lots of things it does. So one of the greatest challenges is when people say, let's use what we know. Let's base our teaching and learning on what we know works. Let's go and buy every book written by John Hattie and eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Let's get Dylan Williams stuff all the time. Let's get some Dylan Williams and reduce it to 5 things that we want them to remember. Hopefully then we'll see loads of great feedback, sharing success criteria. Well, I'm going to go back to some musical metaphors. This is what happens when you don't know, when you don't use what you know. So if you don't use the research, if you don't think about the research that you're hearing, you hit all kinds of problems.
What is the dynamic? What is the dynamic?
Piano, piano.
Ah. What is the dynamic there?
It's still the same. It's pianissimo. Everything here.
So why do you play more?
Because I like it.
I'm very sorry. With all due respect, it's not good enough. If you had said to me, I play it louder, although it's not written, because there is a diminished ninth which has to be resolved, I would have said, chapeau. I may not agree, but you have thought of a good reason to say, because I like it.
No,
That's not good enough.
Of course.
It is all not good enough. So let's erase that I don't like it. I like it. Let's erase that and let's start again. Why do you play louder?
So, how would you like Barenboim as your teacher? That'd be an interesting class. But he's got a point, hasn't he? We work with a lot of teachers who've done things for years because it works for them. That's the same as saying, because I like it. It's not good enough. We have more research to use in more available formats than we've ever had, more than even 5 years ago. And so in my book, for an educator not to begin trying to understand why we do what we want to do isn't good enough. And we can always do better in that front. And I'd be the first to admit it. But using what we know is, or using what is deemed to be known about learning is hugely problematic. Take Sugata Mitra, for example.
Because there will always be communities.
Sugata has this hole-in-the-wall project, which you will almost certainly have heard of. Computer booths in the street, in towns throughout the Indian subcontinent, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And what he discovered is that when you put internet-based science games in English into the street, within 3 months, these street children and young learners who've never spoken English and who don't know the scientific concepts are able to both know the scientific concepts in depth and explain it incredibly well. And the conclusion that Sugata came to, as understood by many teachers, also made him one of the most unpopular speakers in some conferences. We don't need teachers. When students can learn like this, do we need teachers at all? So instead of thinking about it and then testing it and putting it into action, many teachers have rejected that. And in England in particular, there is a almost right-wing fervency about making sure that students learn the dates of all the kings and queens of England since forever, despite the fact that since 1707 they're all Scottish. Anyway, bygones. I didn't believe Sugata either until I saw this video clip, which I showed, again, I think maybe 2 years ago. But this is my daughter, Katrina, a few years ago now. She's nearly 8 now. We had just bought a new car. And it was the first time that when she was born, we moved house. We got rid of the CD player. We became a digital household, streaming music everywhere. So without the CD player, we were able to listen to most music, but some bands you just can't listen to. So if you're a Taylor Swift fan, you have to buy the music. If you're a Beatles fan, you have to buy the CDs. So when we got the car came with a CD player. And I was like, yay, we can listen to the Beatles. And I put on the Red album. What happened? Now, what's magical about this is that Katrina knew all the words to the song, having never heard it before, ever. Her mother, however, while she was pregnant, painting the old house to sell it, listened to that CD on loop all the time. And so this was the moment that made me challenge, maybe Sugata's got a point. Media can teach us so much more than a teacher sometimes can. And as a languages teacher, I can barely remember the words to any song, let alone teach them to a student. And yet here was a 3-year-old who could do just that. So this developed a little bit further. In a big school, like the American school in Japan, it's a private school. Parents are paying quite a lot of money for a great education for their child. And one of the things that parents often expect is homework. It's almost an attitude of, well, I've paid for it, I want it. And if the child doesn't get homework, the complaints are made. In our home, if the child gets too much homework, the complaints are made. So we looked at the research, we looked at what we know. What do we know about most homework in primary schools? We know that most homework in primary schools, including in this case, was pre-programmed a year in advance. They knew exactly what homework was given at each point through the year. And it did not necessarily add to learning. And so Tracy, a New Zealander working there, took it upon herself to try teaching in class in a different way and zapping the homework, other than a little bit of reading. And this is what she discovered.
None of them enjoy homework, and we don't give them, any homework in our elementary except for reading a night. That's it. And they're supposed to do a little bit of math review, and that's it, right? So it's sort of a 10, 15, 25 minutes maximum homework. And the kids they get home, researching about these case studies. They come in and they go, Miss, read about this video. I want to show you this video. I found this thing. Mum and I were talking over dinner last night and we had this thing. Or how family was talking about this and my dad was telling me about this time when he was a kid. And so we get this wealth of information and it sort of spreads out into the community and those kids' conversations, and then they start doing research and it's all off their own cuff. This is not asked. It's not requested. They do it. So to me, it's sort of the benefit of this type of learning is that you meet your expectations that you're accountable for. But in addition to that, the learning is so much for kids, and it's broader and it's more personal. And to me, those are really great outcomes to achieve.
Instead of doing chunked learning, put at each student's ability, instead of that kind of differentiation within the class, and then reinforcement with homework pre-planned after hours, instead, she developed projects with huge provocation, huge so what behind them, that were very much in the zone of proximal development of the students, maybe even a little bit beyond it in some cases. And she did not ask them to do any homework. And the net result was they did homework. So this is a contradiction for a lot of educators. They feel if I don't ask them to do it, if I don't tell them to do it, if they don't write it in their homework diary and the parents see what was expected, then it won't happen. But actually, the opposite is true. And the research shows us that. So the research says, what you think is true, I'm going to contradict. So when you meet these contradictions, and then you start to do what Tracy did, which was, well, I'm going to test this contradiction, into tensions. Tensions are often involve other people. Other people bring tensions to you. You don't bring tension upon yourself. So what about something as uncontentious as feedback? No one here would say that giving feedback is a bad thing to do. Between students, from a teacher to a student. But I can reassure you that in my day job, I meet teachers every day who say, I don't have time to do peer-to-peer feedback, and I don't have time to do all the feedback I should be doing. So it's much easier for me just to give them a grade and a quick note about what they should do to move on with their thinking. So I want to create the contradiction. I create it by showing them a video like Austin's butterfly. Google it, have a little look, show it to your team, show it to your students. In short, Austin had to draw a scientific model of a butterfly that he had seen. And the first version of that butterfly is the slightly playful 5-year-old drawing of a butterfly. It looked like this. And if I got that butterfly from my daughter, I would be happy. I would say, well done, Katrina, that's lovely. You know, nice butterfly, looks like a butterfly. What I wouldn't say is, very good, Katrina, now take a seat. We're going to work way through this. We're going to have a think about it. But that's exactly what happened in Austin's class. They had critique groups. So they go through and critique it. The first thing is on the shape of the wings, which is wrong. So he changes the shape of the wings. It begins to look maybe a little bit more like the scientific version of the butterfly he's trying to join. But by the third one, something's gone wrong. The feedback from the wings has been forgotten because he's been concentrating on getting the part at the bottom correct. This is where most teachers' tension is expressed. They say, Ewan, you told us to do all this prototyping and feedback. It's nonsense. Look at the quality of student work. Because if we're honest, that's not as good as the first butterfly. If you get that, you're happy as a mum or dad. If you get this, you begin to have severe worries about your child. You think, hold on, everyone else's child can draw butterflies. What's wrong with mine? And so this is where we have to literally coach teachers every day and say, have you done it? Have you done the 4th round? Have you done the 5th round? Have you done the 6th round of feedback? And they keep saying, yeah, but it's getting worse. It's getting worse. Have you done it? Yes. We'll do it again tomorrow. And it almost takes that tension. We call it creative conflict. It's the ability to have a fight about it and see it through to the end. And then this happens. It's the déclic, as the French call it. It's that moment where things just click. It works. And in the end, the child's able to draw one that you're actually convinced the primary school teacher drew. It's that good. For us, prototyping culture is about not running to one version of something at the end so you don't have any more time to develop it. It's about producing the end result from the first moment you think about it. So when you prototype, all you have to do is produce the minimum thing that allows you to get some form of feedback from someone else to make it better. The minimum. What is the least emotional investment or heart that you can put into the idea? What's the least amount of time and money or resource? And of course, the fidelity of that idea is going to be low because you're doing it on a Post-it note with a pen, or you're making it out of papier-mâché or something like that. You keep getting feedback, and you don't spend any more time on it until you get to that magical moment, that 4th draft, where you know you're onto a winner and that you're likely to succeed. Now, this is very well researched in the creative industries. This is how the creative industries work. And they do it by having very visible mechanisms for feedback. So if you're in a technology startup, often there is a television screen, and you can see your feedback from your users in real time. You use your Google data to work out whether that page is working or this page works better. So feedback is always there. And you're never making huge innovation. You're always making small changes and tweaking as you go. So how do you make that feedback visible in a classroom? In Brisbane, we asked our teachers to create the most fluorescent, lurid green feedback time wall. And when you have a bright green peer feedback time wall, the students begin to demand it. They say, excuse me, we've not done peer feedback time yet. And here the students have their question, their so what question, who cares? And then the students, everyone else, is contributing their ideas, their knowledge, their own questions to each one. And so every day they go and peel off what they want and develop their project. The next day, they put up their next challenge, and so on and so forth. We've seen this work in Rosendale Primary School as well, electronically, where students feel they've had a learning moment. They capture it using Evernote, a little photograph or a video, and all they have to do is answer these 3 questions. Where have I been in my learning? Where am I now? And where am I going next? And they answer those 3 questions in text, with a voiceover on the video, whichever way they please. We've seen teachers at American school and Japan in high school spend a whole week helping students understand success criteria. And it's often the first time, they say, that students even understand what those success criteria are. When you are working on applying a piece of research that has been contradicting your current practice, and I tell you, when you're trying to use a new piece of practice that contradicts the way your school has always done things, you are going to hit tensions. And like Austin and that butterfly, you must persevere if you're ever going to meet any surprise. I want to go to surprises again in music to finish off. And not all surprises are going to be good. We've had plenty of examples where teachers persevere, and yeah, it's just rubbish. It fails. It's not very good. And they've wasted goodness knows how many evenings trying, and it's just not worked. And as long as you understand why it didn't work, that's fine. Sometimes, though, you need to stop earlier on. You need to prototype early so you can kill what you're doing. And in this case, it's a question of when do you kill a performance with the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra?
Don't answer. Let it rain.
Can you imagine?
When your concert gets interrupted, when do you decide to stop? Is it for your concentration or is it for the audience?
No, it is. Sometimes it's just too much. I mean, if you are in a big moment and the orchestra is playing and you hear faintly in the distance something, I mean, you just go on. But if the music comes to these moments where it's get more and more silent and more magic, and then this thing starts, and of course it doesn't stop, then I say, no, people should realize that music lives on something completely different than kind of being disturbed and thinking, oh, this is important. And I mean, the general attitude sometimes is just awful, you know. And my wife sometimes sits beside, she has to go away because it's if it's silent, if you see not being concentrated, it kills everything that, what is this about? This is the rare moment when our minds can go and focus on one thing. And we focus on it, and we prepare all this, and this is just the least you can do to honor it in listening and being there in silence, you know. But then, of course, it's also...
I think this is a really important point. That lesson from Austin's Butterfly is often lost, because having your focus on just one thing and seeing it through to the end is so important. You mustn't lose sight of it. And just as a case in point, it happened once. You asked him to turn it off. This is it happening the second time in the same performance. Can you imagine that? Now, the reason this is a great lesson is at this point, he just continued. He kept going. So what happens when you take something from ICOT and it doesn't work? The first time, the second time. What about the 10th time? How many prototypes can you go through before you say, this is a really bad idea. It's not working. And then maybe reach out to someone in the community and say, has this worked for you? And that's why I wanted you to go and sit next to people you've not met before. Because these people, when you leave today, I hope you swap email address or Twitter handle, and you say, look, I'm going to try something, you try it too, and I'll see you at Christmas and see if it worked out for either of us. Now, surprises can also, if you do have that focus, you can take something bad and do something magical with it. This is Lukáš Kmit in Slovakia. It is good, isn't it? I just love, it's the little shrug. Oh, that was quite good, actually, at the end. Now, what Lucas has done here is focus. He's just thinking, look, I've started, I'm going to finish, and he keeps going. We had one teacher at the American school, an art teacher. She was, the contradiction that she loved was the 35-year research base that shows grading students does not move learning forward, and that grading and commenting does not move learning forward. The only thing that moves learning forward is feedback, just the comments. So she loved this. She thought, isn't it strange that we have 35 years of research showing us this, and we choose not to listen? So she played it out in her own classroom. She then managed to get her art department to join her. And the surprise she had was this beautiful one. Just listen to what happens when you see your tensions through.
Yesterday, a boy came up to me that I think he's just a sophomore, but he came up to me and said, I noticed next year it says in the school handbook that that art is just going to be pass-fail. And he said, that's going to be wonderful. And I said, why? And he said, because then I can take risks and I can try something that I wouldn't try if I thought that I could do poorly on it.
Do you see the surprise in her face? It's the research said that would happen. She's worked it in her own classroom, it happened. But the moment that she takes it to everyone else and is able to help them work through the tension, she's able then to write in the departmental handbook, you will not be graded on this subject. And that's where the magic happens. It's not just an island of excellence working in this ocean of grading. She's having influence, and she's making better practice come round as a result of it. So I want to conclude by taking something more from the world of marketing and product marketing. And it comes from this chap, Seth Godin. He talks a lot that if you start it, ship it. Don't start anything unless you intend on actually getting your product out there. Now you might think, well, what happens if the product's just bad? And he says, well, I'm saying if you prototype, you find out that your product is bad incredibly quickly. You find out that what you're doing is wrong incredibly quickly because the feedback you're getting so early on is helping you work that out. And so the key is to, stop, as he puts it, stop lining up your ducks. Stop lining up those ducks until you're ready and use the damn duck in front of you. Create something from it. When you look at contradictions, you will find them in the what. So when you were presented today with ideas, often they're about what you're going to do. The tensions come when you apply it, when you're trying to work out how to apply the idea that you heard about, that you want to put into action. The surprises are much more than just going through the motions and reading the right books and attending the right conferences. The surprises only come to those who work through the how and totally, fundamentally question why they have always done things the way they've always done it. That, for me, is the key to success in this. If there were 3 things I would leave you with, it would be these 3 things. Understand your why you're doing what you're doing. Big improvements happen when you build on what you already do well. And learn from your fail. Learn from your first attempts in learning. And with that, it's 6:03, which in Spain, I'm sure, means something rather pleasant. I wish you well. I hope that you join me online, on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever you live online, to share how you work through your own tensions, those contradictions, how you end up with some beautiful surprises. And then in 2017, I would love to hear some of those stories, some of those surprises at the next ICOT. Muchas gracias para todos. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.